All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, Surf Expo, January 2026. I'm here with JR, John Rosenberg, one of the nicest human beings I've ever had the chance to uh, do business with because he was the show director when the company in Atlanta,
Right, the
bought Portman family, bought the show from Jeannie and Ross Houston. And JR came down from Atlanta, doesn't know the first thing about surfing, and proceeded to set a precedent being a real human being. And boy, could he party. We just, all of a sudden, he was one of us. And I want to talk to him about the beginning of the first East Coast Surfing Hall of Fame induction in 1976 or 1976. The first East Coast Hall of Fame induction in 1996. So, JR, can you tell me how did that transpire?
You know, it was so interesting because in 94 and 95, I got to know Cecil and Greg Noah. And I didn't really know the depth of who they were. And they started talking about an awards ceremony. And Greg especially, I want to give back to the East Coast. It is so important because my brothers on the East Coast have not yet gotten the recognition that they deserve.
And that's Greg Knoll.
That was Greg Noah all the way. And so over the next year and a half, we talked about doing it, but we really didn't have anything concrete. And then finally we started to have meetings over the phone.
Hey. We're filming.
She stalls if you're in it. Well, I hope there's a good editor.
These guys. Okay. All right.
What do you want to do?
You're having the conversation.
Oh, so at any rate, so then we just started having conference calls. Greg and Laura Knoll and Cecil and Mary Lou Lear. And the whole concept started formulating. Greg was very clear on what he wanted. And the first one was called Greg Knoll's East Coast Legends, East Coast Surfer Hall of Fame. So he had Greg Knoll on it. And so at any rate, as he talked, I started to understand his true commitment to the industry, like his love for you guys, and how he really wanted to give back. And that's when I realized what Surf Expo was all about. And so what we ended up doing is turning him on and Cecil onto the facility, to the caterers, to the decorators, so that they could formulate the evening. And they pretty much did the rest.
Right. So at that point, Surf Expo was not a co-sponsor.
So I think Surf Expo on the first one, I think we did co-sponsor it, but I don't 100% recall that.
Okay.
But I do believe we did.
Right.
Co-sponsor it. We gave them the room. We gave them all of our discounts to all of the needs that they had to put on the event, and also the Valencia room was under construction, so the event, the first event, was going to be in a meeting room or another room, not near as nice. Well, luckily they finished the Valencia room and we were able to move it into that beautiful hall.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's a ballroom.
Right.
And so that's kind of how that happened.
Wow. And the success of that, how did you guys feel as the business entity here, Surf Expo, feel about the turnout and how it all went?
I just think it was a turning point for all of us, because I think there was some skepticism with, the Mart in Atlanta, Georgia, owning a surf show, and I think once Greg and Cecil and all of our staff bonded that for that event, it all went away. And there was a friendship developed. Um, and here we are 30 years later. I mean, I think we did our job. It was a very emotional night.
Mm.
I mean, I sat on the front row, and I was amazed at the camaraderie and the love in the room. I mean, it was mainly men. There were a couple of women involved in it, but the connection of friends, because I think that's what it kind of ended up being, was like nothing I'd ever experienced.
Well, I mean, for me, it's such a change from the California Attitude Tour of the East Coast to have the legend Greg Knoll want to expound upon how important the East Coast was to surfing,
Yes.
because in reality, 60% of the business that the California companies did was based on the East Coast.
And that
60%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were always treated like a second-class citizen in the surf world by the magazines. And, you know, at that point in time, we had Eastern Surf Magazine, started in, I think, 92.
Right.
And so they were representing. But to have Greg Knoll come along and put this whole thing together speaks unbelievably about his soul in understanding the surf world in the United States.
No, he was a visionary.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question about it. And Cecil was one of the finest human beings I've ever met.
Yeah.
I just
what a
love
saint.
that man,
Yeah.
you know, and his wife. And so, you know, it was trial by fire. It really was in the very beginning. And for all of us to be introduced to one another, you know, it was like, you know, a marriage, and we had to work out some issues. And I think the vibe of us all, because I'm an old hippie, and I can party.
Yeah, we found that out.
I can definitely party, and I mean, I hitchhiked up the coast of California and ended up in Seattle. I hung out with Ann and Nancy Wilson of Heart in the very beginning, so I had a vibe about me, you know, a connection, and I think they felt it, you know, and I
It's a
certainly
beautiful
felt it.
soul, from my
Like you.
experience with you.
Like you.
Well, it's been one of the great honors of my life, and doing business with Surf Expo, but mainly knowing you has turned out to be just a wonderful friendship and a respect that I cherish. So,
Mutual.
yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
So,
Ladies and gentlemen, JR representing Surf Expo, and that's the beginning when it all came together. Thanks. All right.
thank you.
Is that good?
That was beautiful.